For this first lecture, we're going to begin our discussion this summer looking at Plato's political thought. And this is a really important place to start because almost everything that we will discuss this year will somehow be traced back to Plato's thinking, either with people rejecting his fundamental ideas or whether people are trying to build upon his fundamental ideas. Plato ends up being a really important part of this discussion. And to begin this lecture, it might be helpful to give some background to Plato by looking at early Greek philosophy. I should just say before we really get into this, this will probably be a longer lecture than normal. I don't anticipate having this much material for each week, but I do think it's good for us to start with a basic background, especially if you haven't had a course in philosophy yet. It would be helpful to have some of this background. So to begin, most historians of philosophy would say that Western philosophy began with a guy named Thales in a city called Miletus. This was a few hundred years before you have Socrates and Plato. And these first philosophers, I think, were concerned. Actually, I think they were concerned about political philosophy, even though when you look at the little writings that we have for them, and for some of them it's just scraps of writing, they were focused more on metaphysical ideas, which is the study of reality. But I think they saw that metaphysical discussions were important for figuring out the political theories that were being espoused in their day. And the first of these philosophers is a guy named Thales, who has the famous statement, "All is water." And what that meant for Thales is he thought if you dig into the basic elements of reality, like today we say everything is composed of protons, neutrons, electrons, up quarks, down quarks. Thales didn't have those types of ideas. Thales argued if you wanted to figure out what the fundamental unit of matter or unit of reality is, he argued that it was water. Everything is made of water. And so that was Thales' basic idea. He had a student named Anaximander who disagreed with his teacher on this, and he argued that everything is made of what he called the apeiron, which is Greek for some sort of indeterminate boundlessness. And then Anaximenes was a student of Anaximander. He disagreed with both of them and said everything is made of air. And so this got Greek philosophy started with the basic idea that everything that exists can be reduced to one basic substance. And so if you're going to build a political philosophy from that metaphysical starting point, you have to figure out how this can provide a foundations for concepts like goodness, justice, beauty, etc. And I think, again, that was the project that they were trying to figure out, but they wanted to start with first things. From there, you have a huge debate, which I'm just going to, cover not very in depth right now, of people disagreeing with these first philosophers. For example, the first main philosopher to agree that everything can be reduced to a basic substance was a guy named Pythagoras. It's where we get the Pythagorean theorem today. He had a group of followers who rejected materialism, which is the idea that everything can be reduced to a material thing, a material substance. And instead, he argued that things are reduced to numbers, mathematical concepts. This is a form of immaterialism, where the things around us that we see as being physical things, there's a deeper, almost like spiritual, mathematical reality that's governing the cosmos. That was the idea of Pythagoras. Parmenides disagreed with Pythagoras on this, and he went back to materialism, but a more basic idea that everything is one unchanging being. Whether that's material, immaterial, it has to be one unchanging being. And so this is, we might call an unchanging monism. Monism just means one. Everything's reduced to one thing. Zeno disagreed with Parmenides on this, and he has this famous paradox called the paradox of motion, which is meant to communicate that things are always changing. And again, I don't have time to go into Zeno's argument here, but it is a fascinating argument if you want to look it up on YouTube or maybe try to find an article from Zeno. But his basic idea is that things are always changing. Things are always in flux. And so he argued for a changing monism. So things are always changing. They're not static. Heraclitus agreed with Zeno, and he wanted to defend Zeno's idea by arguing that all is a fiery logos. So he's going back to the substance of fire. Now, it's hard to know whether he thought of this as a literal fire or a metaphorical fire, but fire communicates that things are always changing. And then the logos part of that is the Greek word for logic or word or reason. So Heraclitus argued that the thing that governs everything it's one thing, so he still is a monist, but it's a rational, changing thing. That was Heraclitus's idea. And then you have Empedocles, where he was a pluralist. It's not just one thing, but he took the four basic elements of Greek thought during this time: water, earth, air, and fire, and he argued that they're all sort of eternal, and everything is reduced to one of those four substances. From there, you have pluralism just expanding to a group of thinkers called the atomists, where they said everything isn't reduced to one thing, but actually things are reduced to perhaps an infinite number of things, which the atomists called atoms. That's why they're called atomists. So everything is reduced to maybe an infinite number of indestructible atoms. Now, if you want a word that explains this, everything is reduced to an impersonal. So atoms don't think, they're impersonal atoms. That's what everything is reduced to. Anaxagoras was an atomist, but he also added the concept of mind, a governing mind that's governing all these infinite parts. And so he is a personal atomist. Now, one of the things to just point out in this flow of the history of philosophy is that several things start coming up. And so if you're starting to think about, how does this relate to politics, to being able to live with one another? Well, if everything is governed by an impersonal atoms, then you have the job of trying to figure out where do concepts like justice, goodness, beauty come from. But when you get to Anaxagoras, you have an idea that everything is governed by a personal mind. And so perhaps, though this is not argued at this point, but perhaps concepts of justice, goodness could be found in the ideas of this mind, something similar to God. Well, from there, you get a group of thinkers known as the Sophists. And this is where we start to really get more explicit political discussions happening. Because the Sophists, they're also about the closest school of thought that they relate to today would be relativism. They were relativists, and they argued that maybe there are no answers to the big questions that are being debated during their day. Maybe we don't know what the nature of reality is, but we still have to live with each other. And since we have to live with each other, let's just start our discussion there, figuring out how do we organize our personal lives and our social lives in such a way that we can live well with one another. So you might be thinking that if the first philosophers were trying to peer into the box of reality that exists outside of our thoughts and concepts, what the Sophists were saying is maybe there's nothing in that box to look at. Maybe there's no reality out there. And even if there were, it doesn't matter. One of these Sophists was a guy named Protagoras. Protagoras has this famous statement that a human being is the measure of all things. Of things that they are. Of things that are not, that they are not. Another Sophist is a guy named Gorgias, and he has the statement, nothing exists. So again, he's thinking the reality that the philosophers before him are trying to discover outside of their perceptions, maybe there's nothing that exists out there. So this is, he's really making a clear distinction between perception and reality. So if we go outside and we start looking at trees, we all know that we're having perceptions of trees. And what the early philosophers are trying to do is to try to figure out not what our perceptions are, but what is the reality of the tree itself? What is the tree itself made of? And again, what Gorgias is saying, maybe there is no reality out there. Maybe it's just perception. That's it. This is a philosophical worldview called idealism. And from there, Gorgias constructs a rough argument that goes like this. Premise 1, nothing exists. Premise 2, but if something does exist, it can't be known. Because if you look at the philosophers before him, they're not agreeing about what the nature of reality is. So he seems to think that it can't be known if there's this disagreement. But he even concedes from there. If it could be known, it certainly can't be communicated, because if it could, they would have convinced each other by now. But since nobody's convincing anyone, it can't be communicated. So his conclusion is therefore, live by appearances, practice prudence, be practical, avoid idle speculation, and seek practical education, the type of education that teaches us how to live with one another. So hopefully you're seeing how this starts to become a political philosophy at this point, because really what the Sophists are saying is that the rules that govern us are what we really care about, but they're arguing that those rules are not things that are out there in the real world, in the box, that can be discovered by us. Instead, they're invented by us. People invent rules that govern societies, and we need to start our discussion there. Which means rules are relevant only for the people who created them and only in the context and the cultures that they're created. They also argued that rules are unnatural, and this is obvious because people are constantly feeling like they want to break the rules, so people follow them just because they're pressured to do so, which means the essence of justice, what people mean when they're talking about justice, it has nothing to do with truth. It has everything to do with power. Might is what makes right. And so the good life then is a life of pleasure. Now, by this, the Sophists didn't mean like just go out and party all the time. It's just you want to live a happy life. That's what the pleasureful life is. The good life is a life of pleasure, not truth. And so they're rejecting what the first philosophers are trying to do in their pursuit of truth. During the time of the Sophists is when you get Socrates. And for your reading this week, you're reading about Socrates. It was written by Plato, but Plato is writing about his teacher, Socrates. Many people thought that Socrates was a sophist. And today, if you've ever heard of the Socratic method, that way of having a conversation, of asking good questions in pursuit of truth, that traces back to Socrates. He is reported to have said the unexamined life is not worth living. And he would go around during his day having conversations with sophists. In fact, many people thought he was a sophist, but he wasn't a sophist. He would have conversations with them. He would have conversations with political leaders, and he would ask questions about truth, goodness, beauty, and they were never able to answer his questions. And so he got frustrated trying to find out who the wisest person was that he could ask his questions to and get some solid answers. He comes across the oracle at Delphi, and the oracle said, "Socrates, you're the wisest one," which he did not like because he said that I don't know anything. And that actually becomes the first step to knowledge, is to be able to recognize that you don't know things. So stop pretending to know the things that you don't know. He rejected relativism, even though he admitted that he didn't know anything, and he embraced truth. In fact, he argued that truth is inescapable. The Sophists were trying to say that there is no truth, and a Socratic response to that would be to ask the question, is that true? And now that puts the Sophists on the horns of a dilemma, because if the Sophist says, yes, that's true, then they're just admitting that there is a truth. If they say no, well, then you want to reject things that aren't true. And so Socrates came to the conclusion that there has to be a truth, even if we don't know what that truth is. He was accused of teaching strange ideas about the heavens above and the earth below. He was accused of making weak arguments that defeat strong arguments, and of not believing in the Olympian gods, and more importantly, for corrupting the youth. But really what he was doing was he was quizzing the wise, and they were not able to answer his questions. In Plato's Apology, he says that Socrates had this to say about the political leaders of his day. He says, I fancy to admit the truth, which is that they are convicted of pretending to have knowledge when they're entirely ignorant. So in other words, he's saying the reason that people do not like what I'm saying is because I'm showing them that they're actually ignorant when they're pretending to have knowledge. And because of this, he was sentenced to death. And before he was put to death, he forgives his accusers, saying, I'm not angry with my condemners or my accusers, because they have done me no wrong. Now, if there's a principle of life from Socrates, it's a couple things. One, he's a realist, where he thinks there is truth that can be known. And since that's true, he was concerned not with living just a mere life. He wanted to live the good life in an objective sense, which means we need to discover what good actually means. Again, to the end of his life, I don't think he discovered what that was. I think he was convinced that there's a good life out there that could be known, and that's what the pursuit of life is about. So truth does exist. This is where Socrates is at, even if we haven't figured out what it is yet. Well, Socrates, again, was the student or the teacher of Plato. And now we've given that background. Huge flyover very quick to get to Plato. He was born in Athens. Socrates ends up being executed in 399 BC. And at this point, Plato begins his travels because he was distraught by what the people did to Socrates, and he went on this sort of quest of self-discovery to figure out what is it that he believes. He was really doing what his teacher had taught him to do, which was to go out and try to discover truth. And so as he's traveling around, he encounters the Pythagoreans, the people who thought that everything is reduced to math, and he was very influenced by the Pythagoreans, as we'll see in just a moment. But eventually, he comes back to Athens and establishes his academy. So he's following his teacher here who went out and was corrupting the youth. He comes back now and he starts a whole academy to try to teach, to build upon what his teacher started. And then eventually he dies in 347. But the reputation that Plato had is best expressed in a work by Frederick Copleston, where he talks about when people would come to hear Plato give a lecture on, say, morality or goodness, they were often astonished to hear of nothing but arithmetic and astronomy and of the limit and of the one. Which brings up a question: how does math, astronomy, how does all of that relate to ethics? Well, remember, what the first philosophers were trying to do is probably try to figure out political questions or ethical questions like what is the good life. But to be able to answer those fundamental questions, or those, practical questions, I should say, they had to go to the more fundamental metaphysical questions about reality. And Plato is returning to this. So when you look at the three major branches of philosophy, you have metaphysics, which is the main question we're asking in metaphysics is what is real? what do the things around us reduce to? Is it just protons, neutrons, electrons? Is that what everything is built of? Then you have the branch of philosophy called epistemology, which is interested in the question of knowledge. How do we know the things that we say that we know? And then you have ethics, which is the question about what is the good life. And that's where political philosophy comes out of, is the ethical questions. So Plato is the first thinker that we know of to systematically answer all of these questions, which is why Alfred North Whitehead said that the history of philosophy is really just a series of footnotes to Plato. And so what were Plato's main ideas? Well, if you look at this famous painting by Raphael, going back to the Renaissance period, you have these two figures here, I'm sure you've seen this before, who represent two great thinkers. It's not Socrates and Plato. It's Plato on the left of your screen, and then his student, Aristotle, on the right. So Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle, which we'll talk about more next week, had a famous student as well, which is Alexander the Great, which is where you're definitely getting into political philosophy and political life with Alexander the Great. Plato and Aristotle developed the theories. Alexander the Great is one of the people who started to live out these theories. But you notice the gestures between these two thinkers are different. Plato is pointing up, and you have Aristotle, his hand is motioned down to the earth. So I will oftentimes ask people, what do you think that these gestures mean? Sometimes people throw out maybe Plato is pointing up to God, and Aristotle is saying, no, we have to look at this world. That's pretty close, but what Plato is doing is he's pointing up to a realm that he defines as the realm of the forms. And Aristotle is gesturing down to the ground, and this represents two different schools of thought on how you discover truth. For Plato, you have to get beyond the physical world that we see, and then you can discover the true world, the world of the forms. For Aristotle, you have to look at the world that we can observe in front of us, and the forms are actually built into the world that we can see. So to understand what this means, he has a famous allegory to explain his thought called the Allegory of the Cave. And in this allegory, you have people who are chained to a wall, and they spend all of their time for their whole life being chained to this wall, and everything that they ever see are shadows on a wall. And so if you ask these prisoners, what is the real world? All that they know are the shadows that they see. And so they'll point at the shadows and they say, that's reality. Now, every now and then, one of these prisoners will break free from the chain and walk behind the wall, and they'll see that there's a greater reality than just the shadows that they're seeing on the wall. They'll see that there are objects that are actually casting the shadows, and if they go a little bit further, they'll see that there's a fire that's making it possible for there to be shadows. And some people will even notice that they're in a cave, and they'll break out of the cave and they'll realize there is a big world beyond what they could have ever imagined. And when Plato gave this allegory of the cave, it can be used for so many different purposes. It's a great illustration. But what he wanted to illustrate was that reality is divided into two parts. There is the realm of the forms, which for Plato is an immaterial world. This is where he is influenced very much by the Pythagoreans that he encountered in his travels. The immaterial world is the world of ideas. That is the world that most people don't see. What most people see is the realm of the particulars. That's the material world in front of you. Those are the shadows that you're seeing right in front of you. And many people are tempted to say, that shadowy world that I'm seeing every single day, that's the real world. But Plato says we have to break our chains, expand our mind, and see that there is an immaterial world, a big immaterial world outside of the cave. And so we need to get outside of the cave to discover reality. And for him, that's where morality is, that's where justice is. And if you don't actually access the realm of the forms, you can never build a political philosophy that's based upon truth. That is Plato's fundamental idea. So again, what this means is he rejects materialism, the materialism of Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. He rejects that. Reality is not reduced to material substances. Again, he is influenced by the Pythagoreans, where they argue that everything is reduced to numbers. He thought that's closer, that's better, but that's still too restrictive. And so he expands the immaterial idea of the Pythagoreans, because numbers are ideas. He expands that to concept. This is sort of what he means by the realm of the forms. We think in concepts. We feel, and the words that we use to express our feelings are concepts. And those feelings, those perceptions, don't just exist in the mind, but those concepts are actually the things that exist in the real world. Like, we're perceiving and we're discovering a conceptual world, and that world exists in the realm of the forms. Which means, for Plato, beauty is a real thing. It's a concept. It's a thing that we experience, that we put words to. But when we say that something in the world is beautiful, Plato is arguing that that's not something that we just invent. We discover beauty. Socrates wanted to argue this, but he just didn't articulate the specifics of it yet. Plato is giving a systematic thought that's trying to explain where beauty exists. And for him, it exists in reality in the realm of the forms. And again, for political philosophy, why does this matter? It's because justice is not just a perception that we invent. He also rejects the Sophists, just like his teacher. There must be justice in the world that we can discover. And the way that we discover is not by using science and going out and studying biology. The way that we discover justice is we have to use our mind to access the realm of the forms. Now, this gets really complicated and nuanced, but he has many discussions to try to clarify what he means by justice, what he means by goodness. And so he has this famous Euthyphro dilemma to clarify this idea. So if you go to the Sophists said man is the measure of all things. Plato says that's not right. We don't invent moral realities. We don't invent goodness, justice, beauty. We are not the measure of all things. But then he also acknowledges that there are religious believers who say that the gods, or maybe there's one God, is the measure of all things. Plato, in the Euthyphro dilemma, also rejects this idea. He doesn't think that the gods are the measure of all things because, in his perspective, they may be more intelligent than human beings, but they're just like us at some level. Like, the gods could do things that are evil, which for him means that the good, again, which is a concept, is the measure of all things. And so his famous dilemma goes like this. When people say that the gods are the measure of all things, Plato asks the question, is something good because God says it's good? Or does God say that something's good because it is good? Now, this presents a dilemma for the religious believer. If you say that something is good because God calls it good, then you're saying that goodness is arbitrary. Like, God just invents it and just makes it up. And so God could call any action good or any action evil, and it's just stuff that God makes up. And that makes it relativistic, which is the problem that the Sophists had. But if you say, no, God calls something good because it is good, then Plato says, right. If you're saying that, then you're saying what I'm saying, that there is a standard of goodness that even God is submitting to. And what that means is God is not foundational for morality. Goodness is a separate reality. It's a standard. It's a principle that exists apart from any personal judgment. Goodness exists in the realm of the forms. It's not a personal thing. It's an impersonal standard that will always exist and that has always existed. Now, if that's what goodness is, then there's the flip side of the question is, so what is evil? Is there such a thing as a personal evil or a perfect evil that exists in the realm of the forms? Plato says no, evil's not a thing. It's the absence of good. This is called the privation theory of evil, where evil is the absence of good. It's not a thing that exists. So the more you move away from goodness, the more you're participating in evil actions. The closer you move towards goodness and the good standard, the more good you are. And so from here, you get his approach to ethics. The goal of ethics for Plato is about getting our particular moral acts to become more like the perfect form of goodness. This consists for him both in worship and pursuing virtue. Now, what he means by worship is not what many religious believers think of worship today. Worship is just the thing that's the center of your life, the thing that everything revolves around. For him, there should be a reverence for goodness. There should be a reverence for justice. And once you have that reverence, that sort of shapes your character, then you should pursue virtue, which will be developed later by Aristotle, but you should pursue virtue which come from developing habits that eventually make you the type of person that just, in terms of instincts, you start to do good. And so you pursue goodness first, and then at the end of that, you'll achieve true happiness. So now here's how this works. He says the human being consists of three parts. There's reason, there's appetite, and in the middle there's spirit and will. Now when you look at our reason, reason is just our awareness of a goal or a value. Spirit is the thing that drives us towards any action. The spirit, the will, it's neutral. It can be moved either direction. And then you have the appetite, which is the desires of the body. Now, when it comes to living a personal, moral life, to living the good life, what you want to do is not submit to your appetite, to the desires of your body, because the desires of your body are completely arbitrary. You don't decide whether you feel happy or sad. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you're just unmotivated and you're cranky. Those are all the desires of your body. And Plato says when people live according to the desires of their body, a lot of destructive things happen. That's the immoral life. You don't want to be governed by your appetite. You want to be governed by your reason, which is your awareness of a goal or a value. So if you want to, New Year's time is a time where people like to make resolutions. And usually when people make resolutions, they're in their right mind, like they have a rational goal of what they're trying to accomplish in their life. Maybe they want to work out every single day. And so they have this awareness of the goal. This is what I'm striving for as a person. And so to live the good life is to use your reason to kill your appetite so that you're always driving your will towards the right types of actions. That's what it means to live an ethical life. Now, politics flows out of this. Because if this is true for the individual, it's also true for society as a whole. But now, how does that work? And here's where we finally get into Plato's political philosophy, specifically, directly. Everything leads up to this, but this helps you understand all of Plato's thoughts at this point. So Plato argues that to have a just society, you need to have just rulers. These are people who are ruled by reason, because reason is what you use to access justice, which exists in the realm of the forms. So you need to have the right type of expertise. And so he says when it comes to types of knowledge, there's different types of expertise. Medical doctors, for example, have a particular type of expertise. You would never go to a medical doctor who's never taken a course in anatomy. They need to know something about anatomy. They need to know something about physiology. They have a particular type of expertise. Farmers have an entirely different type of expertise. And so if you're wanting to have a just ruler, really what we're talking about is a statesman, a ruler. So what type of expertise does a statesman need to have? Well, he breaks it down into 3 different types of expertise that a statesman needs to have. They need to have theoretical knowledge, and so to become an expert in governing a society, you need to know something about theoretical science. And when it comes to theoretical science, Plato makes a distinction between what he calls mental ideas versus physical labor. So mental labor versus physical labor. There are some people like farmers, like doctors, who will be doing physical labor, which means they're just working on things in the physical world. So that's what he means when he's talking about physical labor. When it comes to a statesman, you want somebody who is not doing physical labor, but they're doing the mental labor, working not in the physical world, but in the realm of ideas. That's what a statesman should be. Somebody who can discover truth about goodness, justice, truth, beauty. Like, that's the type of person you want to have. The person also needs to have expertise in what he calls directive science. So here he makes the distinction between those who are practitioners of truth versus those who are spectators of truth. So somebody who is just a philosopher is somebody who's just a spectator of truth. This is a person who's just trying to understand the world that we live in, but isn't trying to lead anyone. When it comes to being a statesman, you need somebody who can lead people, somebody who's a practitioner of the truth. So they're able to discover it because of their labor that they're given to ideas. Then they're able to lead people into truth. And then the last type of expertise is what he calls pre-directive science. And here he makes a distinction between what we might call a producer salesman versus a retailer. Somebody who's a retailer is somebody who buys products from someone else, brings those products to his store, and then will sell them at his store. Versus a producer salesman is somebody who produces their own products and then sells those products at a price. When it comes to being a statesman, you want somebody who produces their own ideas and is able to sell those ideas to society at large. That's the type of expertise that you need to have. And so political science or political philosophy for Plato is a theoretical, directive, and pre-directive science that shepherds human society. So what you need to do in governing any society is you're trying to help people row in the right direction. And the right direction is the one that's aimed at justice. So how do we do this? How do we create a just society or a just kingdom? For Plato, there are a few different ways that you can structure the world that we live in. You can have a world where the masses, the society, the kingdom is ruled by one individual. You could also structure the world where everything's ruled by just a few individuals, or you could have a society where the masses rule, where the many are governing themselves. Well, which one of these is the best? Well, Plato says we need to think about it. Remember, to live a good life as an individual, you want to live a life that is according to reason. Now, when it comes to politics, according to law, because laws should be rational laws. But you could also live a life that's just completely according to appetite or desire. Any society that's governed by appetite and desire is bad, according to Plato. Any society that's governed by reason or law is good. And so you see that there are different types of governments that could be run by reason versus appetite. So if you have a monarchy, that's a society that's governed by reason. He says that's good. But the moment that that one ruler rules according to his own desires, that's tyranny, and that's bad. An aristocracy is where you have the few that's ruling according to reason or law. That's good. But an oligarchy is when they're ruling according to desire. That's bad. Democracy is when the masses are ruling according to law. That's good. But if they're ruling according to their own desire, that's anarchy. That's bad. So out of all of these, what does Plato think is the best way to create a just society? He argues that you want to set up a monarch, a philosopher king who's governing society. And there's several reasons for this. One, you could imagine the emotional reason for him, that when his teacher was killed, Socrates was killed by a democratic government, where the masses said he was corrupting the youth. And so they voted to put Socrates to death. And so Plato says the masses are not intelligent. Why are we going to let them make decisions like this? They killed the wisest person. Why would we trust them to that? But he also doesn't just go off of his experience and his emotion. He does have a compelling argument for that, where even if the people want to rule according to reason and law, what it takes for them to do this is they have to have expertise that is theoretical, that is, they have to be practitioners of the truth, and they also have to have the pre-directive aspect where they're able to sell their own ideas, and that type of expertise takes a long time to develop. And so if we train every person to have that type of expertise, then who are we training to become farmers? Who are we training to become medical doctors? He's basically arguing that to really have a just society, you need different people who are working for the common good, who are working for justice, but they all have different roles that make the society great. And so for that reason, it's just not practical to educate the masses in reason and law. We want to educate people for the roles that they're passionate about, that they love, and we want to find the best person who can rule society, and for him that is a philosopher king. So tyranny, he says, arises out of democracy every single time, because democracy assumes that everyone is qualified to rule. That's not true. And so what we need is a philosopher king who can guide us into goodness, beauty, and truth. And that is Plato's political thought.